Okay, so main idea is what something is mostly about. Like, what is it that the author is trying to tell you? So, there's lots of details. If we look at this excerpt right here, this paragraph, these couple paragraphs, there's lots of details, and we have to read all of it in order to figure out what the main idea is. Okay, but don't be bogged down by the details. What is the purpose of all the details? So think to yourself, ask yourself when you're answering main idea questions is like, what does this author want me to know? Why are they even telling me this? So let's read it and figure out what the main argument is. So it says, Isaac Newton has often been thought of as the greatest thinker in human history. His insight into the role that gravity plays in existence and physics completely changed our collective understanding of the universe and our place in it. He was understood in his own time as a genius. One famous quote by Alexander Pope, himself quite an intelligent man, demonstrates the deep affection felt for Newton. Nature and nature's mysteries lay bathed in night, God said. Let there be Newton, and all was light. Okay, so if this paragraph was confusing, just look at the first sentence. Isaac Newton has often been thought of as the greatest thinker in human history. Okay, so that's one of the main ideas is that Newton was thought of as a really great thinker. Okay, but look at the title Newton's Mistakes. So even though he was thought of as a great thinker, we're going to learn in this paragraph about some mistakes he made. The second paragraph says, yet, when the famous economist John Kenneth Galbraith purchased Newton's journals and diaries at auction, he found to his astonishment and partial dismay that more than half of Newton's work was dedicated to the practice of alchemy, the pursuit of turning ordinary materials into precious metals. Our current understanding of science tells us that this is impossible and that Newton was wasting a significant portion of his time. Okay, so I want to point out something in this paragraph. You might not know this word alchemy. That's fine. It doesn't matter because it tells you right here. The practice of alchemy, and then there's a dash that indicates that it's gonna define that word for you. Alchemy is the pursuit of turning ordinary materials into precious metals. So even if you have no idea what alchemy is, it doesn't matter. You just need to understand that it's kind of like a pseudoscience, like it's not like a real thing. He was wasting his time. Another famous story about Newton tells of his attempts to figure out the effect of direct exposure to sunlight on the human eye. To carry out this experiment, he decided to stare at the sun for as long as humanly possible. The effect, as you might have guessed, was that he very nearly went permanently blind. Okay, so these two middle paragraphs are giving us details. The first paragraph explains to us that Isaac Newton has always been thought of as a really great human thinker. But then we're getting some details here that explain to us that he actually kind of did some really stupid things. So even though most of us think of him as this like genius, he was also kind of an idiot. So if we look at the totality of all the paragraphs, we see, yes, he was great. Yes, he also made mistakes. Then let's look at the last paragraph. One might determine from these stories that Newton was not the genius we consider him to be, that he was in fact a fool. However, it should tell us something about the nature of genius. It is not merely deep intelligence, but the willingness to try new things and the rejection of the fear and failure. Newton was not a genius in spite of his mistakes, but because of them. So, really, if we can look at the last and the first sentences, we have a lot of insight into what this author is telling us about. In the middle, we have a lot of details that are not super important. You just need to know the gist of them. He made mistakes. He was really important and smart, but he made mistakes. And that just shows us that you can be smart and still make mistakes. So, what's the main argument here? Is the main argument that Newton was a total idiot? That Newton was really, really, really smart? Or somewhere in between? So, these are our possible answers. That Newton's contributions to science made him the greatest mind in human history. That Newton was a genius because of his willingness to make mistakes, not in spite of this. That genius is born, not made. That the pursuit of alchemy is ultimately led to the intellectual ruin of Isaac Newton. Or that in spite of his many breathtaking achievements, Newton should be best remembered for his foolishness. So you have to kind of determine and do like a process of elimination to figure out which one of these is the best answer. They're all like slightly right, but one is the best, okay? So, in Newton's contribution to science make him the greatest mind in human history? No, nowhere in there does it say he's the greatest mind in human history. It says that he's thought of one of the greatest thinkers, but that doesn't make him the greatest mind ever. So, let's X that one out. That Newton was a genius because of his willingness to make mistakes, not in spite of this. Maybe. That genius is born, not made. No, I don't think it's saying that at all, so we can X that one out. That the pursuit of alchemy ultimately led to the intellectual ruin of Isaac Newton. It did talk about alchemy, and it did say that that was a stupid thing he did, but it didn't say it ruined him. It said that he was still a genius in spite of his mistakes. Or that in spite of his many breathtaking achievements, Newton should be remembered best for his foolishness. I don't think it's saying that either. I think it's saying he had a lot of great achievements and he made mistakes. So let's look at the correct answer. It says that Newton was a genius because of his willingness to make mistakes, not in spite of this. So that would be this one. And if we look at the last sentence, Newton was not a genius in spite of his mistakes, but because of them. This shows us that, yes, making mistakes made him a genius. That Newton was a genius because of his willingness to make mistakes. So it basically says the same thing as that last sentence. Okay, so that's how we can kind of figure out the main idea. All right, we have now a poem to read, and we have to figure out the argument of the speaker. Okay, there's going to be lots of words. This is a super old poem, 1848. So there's going to be lots of words we don't know. But that's okay. We'll be able to figure out the speaker's argument. If by dull rhymes, our English must be chained, and like Andromeda, or if you don't know this word, it's somebody's name. It's capitalized, so we know it's a name. It doesn't really matter if we can pronounce it. It's just skip it. The sonnet, sweet, fettered in spite of pained loveliness. Let us find out if we must be constrained. Sandals, more interwoven and complete, to fit the naked foot of Poesy. I might not know what this word is, but I know they're talking about sandals, and we're talking about constraining people, okay? Let us inspect the lyre. I don't know that word, but that's okay. And weigh the stress of every chord and see what may be gained by ear industrious and attention met. Misers of sound and syllable no less than Midas of his coinage, let us be jealous of dead leaves in the bay-wreathed crown. So if we may not let the muse be free, she will be bound with garlands of her own. Okay, so there's lots of words I don't know, and I'm having a hard time understanding what he's saying. But he's making an argument, and we have to figure out what the central argument is. Let's look at our answers. The story of King Midas. It mentions Midas, but I don't think it's telling his story because he's only barely mentioned. The process by which sandals are made, I think that's a no. The sonnet form. The use of complex references in poetry. The translation of poetic works. Okay, so let's try to figure it out. He's saying our English must be chained. If by dull rhymes our English must be chained, so chaining up our words with dull rhymes, so like boring poetry. It's talking about being constrained. I see the word constrained, chained. So for me, freedom, right? Talks about freedom. So for me, the one that talks about the form, the sonnet form, seems like it might be the right answer. And yes, it says that it is the sonnet form because the title is on the sonnet. And so I kind of took a guess on that one, but he's talking about not being constrained by form, but having freedom. So that's what it made me feel was the right answer. Okay, and there's an explanation there.